This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 83 of the Photographing the West podcast. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan. The video version of this podcast can be found on YouTube at Flanagan Photos. The audio-only version can be found at www.flanaganphotos.com, iTunes, and most RSS feeds. It's a great pleasure to introduce today's guests, world travelers and photographers Joe and Marianne McDonald. Welcome, you two.
Thanks, Kirby. It's nice to be here.
Ditto.
Okay. So please tell everyone about yourselves as photographers and people in general. Ladies first.
All right. Well, I didn't start out as a wildlife and nature photographer. I was actually in medical research for 12 years. I was a biology pre-med major in college, so I was always into biology and nature and out of doors. And I started with the research, and after taking my first photo workshop from Joe, I realized that I really enjoyed the nature and the wildlife. And the rest is history, which we can talk about later, but I'll put it to Joe.
Okay.
Well, she wasn't really interested in the wildlife and nature. Let's get that straight.
We don't need to tell the people that. That's okay.
Anyway, I've been doing this basically all my life. I used to draw quite a bit when I was a kid, and I loved reptiles and amphibians, and thought I would become a herpetologist as I was like in middle school or whatever. And around that time, in doing pen and inks and looking at books, I decided I should take pictures of these things too. And I made the mistake of trying to photograph a groundhog in my backyard with a 50 millimeter lens, which was fine for the reptile work. And it was a little dot. And it so intrigued me, bummed me out that I had a terrible picture. But it so intrigued me that I started researching about wildlife, and my parents kind of indulged me with being able to get an SLR, and then I got a telephoto and went on from there. So I've been doing this basically since about 9th grade.
Okay. And you got published early on, I think I read somewhere.
Yeah, I was very lucky in that regard too, because when I was, I think, a junior in high school, National Wildlife Federation had this thing called a film library, where you would send pictures to them, they would duplicate them, give you the dupe, and pay you. At first it was like $5 or $6 for the transparency, and then it went up to a whopping $10 or $11. But for a kid in high school, I was suddenly getting checks of $150 and $300 every couple of months, and that got me going. And then when I was a freshman in college, I submitted my first article to National Wildlife, and they used it. And I had several, like, while I was in college then, and then I discovered stock agencies, and basically had the beginning of a career. But when I graduated from college, I ended up substitute teaching and then teaching for 6 years because I didn't know if I'd be able to make this as a full-time living. And then I got laid off. And when I got laid off, I wrote a book. And when I wrote my book, everything went on from there.
So it's kind of funny listening to Joe, because when I first met Joe, he was our speaker at our monthly bird club meeting, and he was already doing workshops. So I took my first workshop from him. And from that workshop, I had my first picture published in National Wildlife. So it's kind of fun to hear us both kind of starting out, with that one magazine and with that one organization. And then when we realized that we could do this together and work together, that's when our whole career started together.
Yeah, this is kind of skipping ahead to some of the things about the career, but it's really kind of tragic that when I started, you had National Wildlife and International Wildlife and Smithsonian Magazine and Natural History
And
and Wildlife Conservation and several publications that were now are only a fraction of what they were before, which are those that are still in business. So it's been a whole different ball game, and we got into it as the other professionals that are like my age did, that we were there at a good time for at least the print media.
Right. Sounds like it. So you talked a bit about how you got started. So you guys were into wildlife photography from the beginning, it sounds like then, huh?
Yeah, I was, like I said, I was very interested in reptiles. And then when I was in ninth grade, actually, there was a thing called the Lehigh Valley Cultural Center, which was
in
also,
Eastern Pennsylvania, by the way.
yeah, all sorts of different things. But one of them was for like a natural history unit. And several folks that were like in their 30s or 40s were mentors to me there. And from that, I met kids my own age that were into bird watching and got involved with that. And so I had a 3 or 4 peers that were into this as well. So we were, we'd go on trips together and do whatever. So it was a really nice way to reinforce and almost compete with one another about taking pictures and looking for wildlife and whatnot. And I think that was a real motivation, or not a motivational, but a seminal moment in my development, my career.
Well, and we were both being biology majors, we were both into natural history, and we were both birders and everything. And even now, we always say that the best wildlife photographers are also the best naturalists, because you need to understand your subject and know where to find them and know the behavior so that you can predict what might happen, so you can capture it on film or on digital at this point. And we were able to take our love of wildlife, and especially Joe with him turned it into a career that we both love and enjoy. And even now, after 35 years, it's not a job, it's not a career, it's still a passion that we love to do.
Yeah, I gathered that from talking to you before and looking at your website. So with everybody and their brother taking photos these days, how do you keep your photos new and different and fresh and relevant?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there is a huge amount of talent out there today. We belong to the North American Nature Photography Association. They have an annual contest and produce a beautiful book of images. And when we look at that, I can't help but being humbled by what I see. I mean, there's some enormous talent. I think in today's world, we're lucky we got started when we did and established ourselves. But getting back to your question on that, I've never been motivated by what people wanted. I've always shot what I liked to do, and whether or not it ever sold was kind of immaterial. But because I was producing stuff like with flash and with high-speed action and things like that, and with our exotic travel that we did, I had images that in fact were marketable and we sold. But even today, neither of us are motivated by the market, if you will. And in fact, at this point in our lives, I'm just as happy when we're doing our photo tours and leading, that the folks get these great shots and they're trying to get them published or out on Facebook or whatever. We're past the point now of having to prove ourselves, and it's nice actually turning it around and being mentors for other folks.
Well, it's the industry's definitely changed with the onset of digital. I mean, when we were slides and we started out Kodachrome 25 and Kodachrome 64, you had to know the craft. I mean, you had to know exposure, you had to compose in camera, and everything had to be perfect. So at that time, there were a limited number of professional photographers who could make a living at all of this. But now with digital, a lot more people can capture images and make incredible images and capture behavior that couldn't be done before. With that in mind, then the photo sales, which used to drive or kept our business, well, we used to drive the business, is now basically gone. Nobody can really sell images. And we were lucky because when we first started this, we talked about what our strengths were, and it happened to be in teaching and people and sharing the wildlife and the behavior. So with us starting our photo tours and the workshops, we were way ahead of the game when it came to leading the photo tours. And because we've been going, say, to Kenya now for almost 35 years, and to East Africa, we know the areas, and that's what kind of helps keep it alive and to keep it interesting, because we're never bored out in the field. And by us, even if we're not taking pictures, with us sharing all this and like Joe said, helping other people to capture those images, it keeps it fresh for us and keeps us going.
You know, adding to that, when, say, the first 10 years of my career, which basically would start full time around 1985, if you saw photographers out in the field, even just amateurs, they knew the names of the players. You know, they knew John Shaw's name and Art Wolf's name and Leonard Lee Rue and, you know, folks like that. And those guys now, or not John, because he's still current, and so is Art. But today, with the abundance of images that are out on Facebook and Flickr and Instagram, I wonder how many of the, in fact, when I'm introduced out in the field now to people, it's like, oh, hi, good to meet you. And they have, and I don't want to sound egotistical, but they have no idea that we've been a player in this, you know, forever.
We're kind of the old farts in the business at this point.
And 15, 20 years ago, it would be like, oh my, you know, but there's so many names out there today. And
well, and what's kind of funny is we are introduced, or as people see us in the field now, because we switched to Olympus gear, it's a lot smaller. I mean, it's easier for us to carry, and it makes it more fun again because it's not carrying 30 pounds of gear. They'll look at us with our smaller lenses and cameras, not realizing that we have a 600 millimeter, and they're looking at all these other people with still the big telephoto lenses and thinking, oh, they're just some old people that like doing photography. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I get a kick out of that because I was in Florida last year, and we were on a boardwalk, and I saw these people struggling with this heavy equipment and going along, and I'm carrying a monopod and the equivalent of 840 millimeters and getting wonderful shots. I mean, as good as I've gotten anytime. And I knew that, you know, folks didn't recognize me, and it was like, oh, you know, there's an amateur.
He's
you know,
a retired, he's a snowbird
he
out
doesn't
here.
know what he's doing. And so I'll have to develop an ego and start being offended by this.
Nah, it won't happen.
Yeah, well, that's probably good in the field of photography, because as soon as you're feeling like you're there, then somebody else comes along and lets you know you're not. So
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And like Joe said, it's humbling because there's so much great talent out there. I mean, around the world, that, you know, it drives us to keep trying to be as good as we can, but it's also great to see so many other people being able to enjoy it and to produce such award-winning photos.
We had a discussion about this kind of thing when we were up in Snow Leopards one time, and there was a South African photographer, and we were talking about things, and I said, when I started, you had to have a feeling like you were the gunslinger and you were the fastest gun in the West, and you shot as good as anybody, and you know, you were kind of, you may not have been outwardly egotistical, but you know, in your heart, you knew that, man, you were good, and I'll prove it. And I said, I'm at the point in my career now that I feel like I'm the sheriff. You know, I was the fastest gun. I know what I can do, and I'm ready to enforce the law now, and I don't have to worry about, you know, these upcomers that are.
Yeah, let those young bucks hike a mile up the 1,000-foot slope. We'll wait till the animals come down.
Wait a minute, I still do that. But anyway, my South African friend, we now he refers to me when he writes me an email as the sheriff, you know, and but it just I think with maturity you realize you know, you have to have an ego to jump into this business because it's so competitive. You have to believe in yourself, but you don't have to necessarily
show it.
Be egotistical and a jerk about it. You know, you just have to have the self-confidence.
But you do have to have the ego in the sense that this is a business and you have to be able to market yourself and market your images. So if you don't believe in yourself, how can you do that? So, you know, there is some business aspect to it all with this ego thing, even though it's more self-confidence than ego, I think.
At least with me, I don't know.
So speaking of business, obviously you guys do lots of workshops and tours, and how has the pandemic affected you business-wise and personally?
Okay, I just said I'll answer because I've been involved in this. At this point, we have canceled and are rescheduling every single trip that was scheduled for this year. A lot of our trips are international, and many of the borders are closed right now to a lot of the different countries like India, Brazil, Ecuador, Rwanda. So we decided, I mean, we being over 60 are kind of in one of the target groups of being susceptible to catching the virus and everything. And many of our clients are easily in their 50s or 60s or early to mid 70s. So not knowing any of the travel restrictions that might be in place, or especially because there's no vaccine or no treatment, and not wanting to be caught in a country that they suddenly close the borders and you can't get out, or you get sick in that country and the medical care might not be as good as here. We have basically rescheduled everything into next year, and also some of the trips into 2022. So right now we have no income, so to speak, but we are loving it because we're actually at home for the first time at this time of year, and than we've been here in years. And we're coming up and we have the time to do lots of different projects that have been on the back burner. But we will travel again soon. And you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, had I answered that question, I would have said, this is killing us. Done. But you got the background information now.
But it is,
Okay.
It's killing a lot, everybody in our profession, all of our contemporaries, you know, we're all hurting. Nobody is traveling, nobody is doing workshops. It's a real struggle. We've all been trying to support each other with trying to apply for like the PPP loan, that payroll protection plan, or if somebody's really self-employed, trying to help them figure out unemployment, anything to help keep the businesses going, because none of us, we're pretty sure, well, we know we're going to make it, but there are a lot of people that really don't know. And it's really hard for everybody right now to figure out a future because there's no guidance, there's no set plan for any of this to figure out what's going to happen.
What's been nice on this too is although we're all theoretically competitors for for clients, for workshops and tours, or even for book sales, whatever, the community of fellow photographers they've been calling us and asking questions. I've been reaching out to them for promoting some of the stuff that I'm doing right now. And it's been really, really, it's what I expected, but it's really gratifying to see.
The competition's gone out the door. It's more supporting each other just so we can all make it through this year, so that we can all compete with each other again next year. I mean, it's really been a nice, good, cohesive feeling.
And regarding that competition, with extremely rare exceptions, people have always been extremely gracious, and like we'll be down in the Pantanal in Brazil, and we'll bump into somebody that that they're doing a tour too, and it's like we may have only met once before, or maybe never, and like I said, for the most part, it's like, man, how you doing? We're like like family and old friends, even if we've only met once before, and it's a great community in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think this is the new normal, or are you expecting things to go back to the way they were?
Ooh.
Or who
I
knows?
think there will be a new normal to an extent. It's so up in the air right now. I've been doing a lot of reading on past viruses and things, and I can't make a prediction there, but I think at least for the next 2 or 3 years, it will be a new normal. And I was talking to one of our outfitters, and he was saying about what they were doing. I said, I think that what will eventually happen as far as protocol and stuff, we can't even envision right now. We're thinking in the past and working in that fashion, and what's going to happen is something that we don't even know yet, and we'll adapt in that regard. But I think for the next several years there will be a new normal, and then perhaps that will become the new normal. In regards to that, I'm sure there's going to be people in our profession that will be out of business, and some of the lodges and some of the companies that we use around the world are going to be out of business as well. So maybe others will surface from that, but I think an entrepreneur might also be thinking like, wow, this could happen again. Do I want to get myself involved in this type of a business if it was like boats or,
Well, and
lodges?
I think what's also going to happen is it's not just the new norm in the sense of we might have to wear masks on planes, be checked for temperatures as we travel. But this whole economic downturn and the recession that we're now in, a lot of people have lost their savings or have had to go into the retirement funds just to survive, to pay rents or mortgage or whatever. So I think it might take a couple years for most people to build up the financial backing to even want to or be able to travel again. So I see some of the people that we have scheduled that have rescheduled with us for next year, they had the money, it's already put aside, or they've already paid us and it's out to people. But I think it's going to take a couple years for everything to build back up. And I think it's during that time that, like Joe said, some of the lodges and camps and outfitters, even airlines and stuff may go under because the economy won't be there to support all of the businesses that were there even just 3-4 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. So how are you guys dealing with that, other than rescheduling things and hoping for the best?
Well, we don't have a enormous mailing list or participants list because about 80 to 90% of our trips are filled with people that have done previous trips. So we're talking about a few thousand rather than like 100,000 clients or whatever. And with that, I really think we have kind of like more of a family atmosphere and a family community in that regard. So people have been really good about rescheduling for next year and realizing we're all in the same boat. So on that regard, though, Mary has been putting in at least 2/3 of every business day, which might be from 9 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night, on doing whatever is involved with rescheduling and contacting people and back and forth with the outfitters. So it has put a workload on her that's been enormous, meaning that I haven't had to do anything. It's been wonderful.
He does a lot. But to also kind of answer your question, by us now being at home in this forced off time, we're actually looking at projects that we've had on the back burner for a long time. Joe's doing some more video, like teaching videos that he'll have out soon on our YouTube channel. I'm working on a cookbook that people have asked for the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years. We're doing more, possibly going to do a little bit more online teaching or more teaching videos. So we've been able to look at projects we've really wanted to do, and we now have the time to do it. And that's actually exciting for us because it's giving us a whole new venue, a whole new direction to kind of look at, if we do have to wind down with the trips because of travel restrictions or whatever, we're ramping up other parts of the business, and that's going to keep us going, and that's what's making it fun.
Good. Yeah, a lot of people seem to be moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So in that circumstance, are you guys still going to be writers as well as photographers?
Oh yeah. Mary just completed her editing of a book that I just did on the Olympus focus stacking system, where you shoot a series of frames and the camera software makes it into a finished product, and it's more it's not more complicated than what I just said, but if you want to make a good image, there's other factors involved, like with your aperture and how many shots you take, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing things like that, and I have a whole list of subjects like that I'll be doing, and the videos that will go along with it. The neat thing about it is when we were traveling 30 weeks of the year, in the time that we were home, you were continually on playing catch up rather than ever being creative. And one of the things that I used to, when we would talk about like careers, if you will, like when we'd give a workshop or a weekend seminar and people say, how'd you get started? And, whatever. I would liken it to a snowflake that as it rolled downhill, got more snow attached to it, became a snowball, and eventually became an avalanche, and it had its own momentum of business. And really a successful business works like that. But as that avalanche rolls, you don't have time for another snowflake to develop because you're in that roll of the momentum. And we have now hit an uphill on that avalanche. So we have a pause now that we can be doing things that we've had on the back burner for forever because we simply didn't have the time. So it's been actually a great growth period for us. And we'll go for walks every day and look for wildlife, and I'm looking for photo opportunities with the nesting birds and feeding and stuff. And it's like, man, this is like retirement, and I love it because I have time now to enjoy our location. We haven't been here in Pennsylvania basically for the last 25 years, the last 20 years at least.
And in just the past week, we found white trillium, which is a really cool, special, rare spring wildflower. We have pink lady slippers, which is a type of orchid that we found again in places that we knew had been years ago. So that's been fun. And when you ask about writing more books, we've already done books, behavior books, like on mountain gorillas and big cats and things like that. And we have more of those type of books in our plan. One on the Great Migration, one on some other things. I know you had made the reference in as we were preparing for this about my children's books, which in the past I wrote 29 children's books and would go to an elementary school as a visiting author, which was a hoot, and I loved it. But the wave of the future is more electronic books, ebooks for kids. And my goal is, once we kind of get through this one thing of trying to get everything in order for the next year or two, is to actually work on more children's books so that they could be presented in an ebook fashion. And then instead of what's happening in the elementary schools, instead of you going as a visiting author, you do Skype visits. And even if schools remain kind of in a pandemic or like social distancing guidelines or whatever, you can still do visits with different classes in different schools with the different, being like now, like we're doing. So it's a whole new way to look at some of the kids' books that I've done in the past and continue along that realm.
But the big news flash is Mary has, when we're home for our domestic workshops and things, Mary's always cooks either a lunch or a dinner or whatever. And she's a very good cook and makes these great recipes. And for the last, I think, 45 to 75 years, she has been promising, she's not that old, but she has been promising to make a cookbook of these recipes. And she's in the final pages of actually getting this thing produced. So that will be her next book. And it has been a decade in the making.
Truly.
Because it's been like, oh, I'm going to get it done, this summer. I'll get it done at Christmas. And with our schedule, it has been impossible. So it's as you can hear as we're talking about this, we're not bummed out. We're actually pretty excited about the opportunities that we're having. And
yeah, and people were saying like they didn't know what to do during this with being stuck at home. And we've stayed in our schedule, getting up every morning before 7, working in the office all day, taking some breaks in the afternoon, but back in the office at night. So we have stayed busy, and we're actually happy campers.
Well, that's good. Not many
Yeah.
people that can say that at this point in time, I think. So switching gears a little bit, how long have you been shooting Olympus and how did that get started?
Well, um, it'll be going on, what, 3 years now in September, I think it is. And Olympus had and they may still have a program going where they contacted professionals and had like a 2-month loaner of a basic kit to get you familiar with Olympus. And I got the notice for that, and I thought, what the heck, I'll sign up. And it was just sitting on my desk, and we were going on a trip to Yellowstone. And one of my friends who shoots some Olympus and Canon as well said, don't take your Canon, your equipment, because you won't use the Olympus. You'll fall back to what you had. So I did that, and I took only the Olympus gear and liked it. And then went to Kenya with it and took some Canon gear, because at the time Canon had, for video, it has high-speed video, slow motion video, and the Olympus at that point did not. So I took the Canon gear and was shooting stuff like I've never shot before, mainly because there's a feature called Pro Capture. And then our next trip was to Chile. And in this period of time, to be honest, I was contacting Olympus and saying, you should give me this gear because I know what I can do for you guys with Olympus. And they wouldn't do it. It was like, no, we're not going to bribe anybody. So we were, the last day of our Chile trip, I said,
and we were both shooting it, just not you.
Yeah, it was both of us shooting this. I said, we have all the Canon gear we'll ever need. You know, we can retire, we can die 10 years from now and we have everything we need with Canon. We don't need to spend any money to buy new gear because we have everything. Or we can spend the money and enjoy ourselves. So we decided, let's not cut off our nose to spite our face. Let's buy the gear. And in selling just like my 800 and my 2 to 400, we paid for everything that we bought with Olympus because it's so much less expensive. And then after that, we were fortunate enough to get into the Olympus Educator program, which is a great program. But and my God, we have really converted a large number of people, and virtually everyone that has said photography has become fun again, because one, you know, you're not carrying all that weight, and the features like that focus stacking and pro capture and live composite, there's so many neat things that you can just experiment with, that it's not just shooting, you know, it's like shooting and creating. So we're really excited about it, and it's been, you know, like I said, 3 years, and it honestly like put a new lease on life for me. You know, that it was like, oh man, I'm excited to shoot all this stuff all over again, or shoot new ways with the new gear. So it's
well, it's also made it easier to travel.
Oh yeah.
Because when we would each have a 500 millimeter lens, or I would have a 500, Joe would have an 800, we'd have our big Canon bodies. There was a lot of weight and a lot of gear to try to transport in the planes, whether it was on carry-on or in checked luggage. And now with the Olympus gear, we can carry a full complement of stuff with 2 to 3 cameras each, several different lenses, and it's each in a nice rolling carry-on, which isn't that heavy. And even our backpacks, when we had to go to South Africa, we had limited weight because of our internal flights. The backpack with the gear was only like 18, 20 pounds. And it has just made it so much nicer. You know, no hassles with the airlines, with traveling, with carrying it. It's really made it nice.
Yeah, my Canon 800 millimeter, the weight of that was basically the entire weight of the kit that I take out in the field now. You know, and that's with 2 camera bodies generally in a backpack, sometimes 3, with the 300 millimeter and converters and 2 other lenses. And that whole kit weighs 18 pounds. When we were up in snow leopards, the first several trips, I would hire a local guy to be basically my porter. And
he would have Joe's lens in the front of him and my lens on the back of him, because we couldn't be hiking at 14,000 feet carrying all this stuff.
And this last time, I I felt really bad not hiring him, but luckily there was another person shooting Nikon or Canon who needed a porter, and he was available then, and he portered for them, and then luckily got hired by that company to be a full-time guide for them because they weren't familiar with them. So it was a good story. But we were both able now to carry our own equipment without killing ourselves. So as you can tell, I'm really excited about that Olympus stuff. And what's really crazy on it is I never, ever, ever talked about Canon or Nikon or competing. It's the cameras didn't matter, and it was like, I don't care what you shoot, I don't care what I shoot. But I'm so excited about the system that because of the potential and just the ease, to be able to hold a 300 millimeter in your hand. There's a pen, but symbolically, it's made a big difference.
So which version of Olympus are you shooting now, camera-wise?
Well, we started with the OM1DE Mark IIs, and then we got the M1Xs, but they've come out with a new one, which is the Mark III, and it has almost all the features of the M1X, except one battery versus two, so it's small like the Mark II camera, and it's going to be the camera for people that are buying Olympus gear. It has a great autofocus system. It's small, and the optics on the lenses are just spectacular. So we're using all three, and to be honest with you, I probably use the M1X the least often, unless I'm going to be shooting stills and video, because if I'm shooting video, I can flip it to high-speed video and shoot 120 frames a second. And the other cameras don't have that. They have 60 frames per second. So that slow motion makes a difference there. When people ask me, like, hey, what camera to get, I said, get the Mark III. But if you just want to start, go with the Mark II, which is like $1,100 or so, or $1,000 now, and is just a dynamite camera.
Mm-hmm.
The whole kit for about $10,000, you could have everything that you would need. Camera, maybe two camera bodies, maybe three, several lenses. And if you were like ourselves with that 800 5.6, we basically sold when we sold that, we paid for one whole kit, and that was at like fire sale prices because it was used, and then the 200 to 400, the same thing. So we were actually ahead.
So they have a 600 prime, did you say?
Well, the way the Micro Four Thirds system goes, it's a smaller sensor, so the 300 millimeter is basically double the focal length in what the image size that you capture. So it becomes a 600 millimeter for all intents and purposes. But technically it is a 300 millimeter lens, and it gives the optical view of a 600. Just like if you had a Canon 1DX and it's full frame and you're shooting 400, but if you're using like the 1D, it's a 1.6 crop factor, so it's like 560 or whatever the heck it ended up to be, or 620, whatever. Yeah.
So does the Micro Four Thirds limit you as far as making large images, or don't you do that anyway?
Well, we do, and one example, we had I shot a Harpy Eagle from where were we? Panama.
Were in Panama.
And I made a 20 by 30 print of it, but we were far away. It was at a nest, and I cropped it so it was full frame on the for the print, but the crop was about 1/16 of the actual image, and made a 20 by 30 of it from a 1/16. And when I pulled it out of the box and looked at it at arm's length, I was really disappointed because it was pixelated. But we put it on the wall, and at the viewing distance of like 8 feet or whatever it is, it looks perfect, because you're seeing it at that distance. And that was at 1/16. Actually, a little bit more because I used the software of the printing program to expand it a little bit. So it was probably more like 1/20th. For virtually all of our normal shooting, it has not been any kind of a problem at all. The one issue that Olympus might have is the noise factor is probably busier from like ISO 3200 up. But my God, you're at ISO 3200 before that, or further before it becomes any kind of an issue. So it hasn't been something that's like, oh boy, I wish I was shooting such and such for it.
No, but we can often take an image, even if we shot it like at the 300, which is 600, we can crop it 50% and still get a great image with no noise. So that hasn't been any type of issue with that 4/3, system.
And then what do we have? Is like Topaz AI or the artificial intelligence noise reduction and sharpening programs. And I've used those, and they erase the noise pretty darn well if there happens to be any. So I have one thing about sharpness that I think is something that I have a bone on, and that's that people they're so involved with like megapixels that, okay, let's 50 megapixels or 60 megapixels, and they're saying, well, for landscape it really gives detail. You think, all right, if you do a 30 by 40 print in landscape, how close are you when you're looking at it? You're probably looking at it at 4 or 5 feet. You're not right up on top of it. And does it really matter then if the stem of a leaf in your landscape shot is sharper with that 50 megapixel than it is with a 20 megapixel? I don't think so. But some, it depends on people's standards. But we're truly getting some of the best shots we've ever done before because of the portability, the fact that we could be driving in Chile after Pumas, for example, and have 840 millimeters in our lap. And if something was good, just stand and shoot out of the window.
Keep talking.
Shoot out of the window or step out of the car and hand hold that. And if I was using my old Canon gear, I would have had to have that lens on a seat next to me, and there's no way I could have simply picked it up.
Okay, so what I went to get is, I don't know if you can see it, that right there is the 300 millimeter lens with the camera on it. Make sure that, and that is 800 millimeters.
No, right now it's 600 millimeters.
Oh, 600 because I don't have a converter on. So you can see, like holding it up against me, make sure I'm in, how little I am, and that's now 600 millimeters. And I could lift it with one hand and shoot if I have to. I have shot hand holding flying birds and different things. So it really makes it nice.
Yeah, I don't want to make this sound like an Olympus commercial, but man, I love this stuff. I've done things with it with the autofocus where following skimmers down in New Jersey or down in the Pantanal and black skimmers, like one of the like a tern-like bird. These things fly fast and erratically. And back when I shot Canon, if I was using a 500 or 800, I had to have a tripod, and I was using a Wimberley. And if the bird's going at 90 degrees, you'd have to step around your tripod leg in order to keep following it. Now with this stuff, I don't even use a monopod, and I can be turning and twisting, and the autofocus is keeping up perfectly. And I'm like I said, I'm getting shots that I never got before, and it's exciting. It just makes you want to go out and shoot more.
Well,
it's made
like
photography fun again.
So do you use the Olympus for your videos, or do you have a dedicated video camera?
Yeah,
How do you do that?
I do. For the videos, it has several different settings for it, including 24K, which would be cinema quality and has that format. So we use the video, and the back of the camera has a switch that you can go.
You can see the camera. No, there.
Well, there's a switch there that can go from 1 to 2, and if you set it up, you can just simply flip it to 2, and it's already in the video setting. So I can be shooting something in still and say, wow, that'll be, I got enough stills, let's flip to video. Flip it to video with that number 2 spot, and start shooting video with it. And then if something interesting with the still happens again, I can flip it back to one. And the video quality is superb. It's really, really great. When we were in snow leopards the last time, we had a mother with 2 cubs that were probably a half-mile away. And I had the Canon or the Olympus 300 with a 1.4.
No, you had the 2X on it.
Did I?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Yep.
Okay, and then I used the digital converter that is involved with this too, and the digital converter doesn't give as great a quality, but I was shooting now this snow leopard going along a ridge and coming down for the kill and eating and moving up, and was able to produce a video that I could put on YouTube that was reasonably decent, and nobody got anything other than what I got there, because at a half mile, you know, you're talking about impossible photography, and yet with an animal moving across the screen and not being that small, it actually was quite nice. And the microphone at that distance, this is what brought that up. The mother was calling for the cubs, and the microphone at that distance picked it up. It was faint, but you know, you could hear that ew, ew, that it was doing. And then I can enhance that with the you know, the editing software, that it was more audible. So yeah, the video's been fine, and it's been so nice to be able to just use one camera for both rather than grab a video camera to do the same thing.
For sure, yeah. Let's see, something else I was going to ask you and just went out of my head. Oh, what software do you guys use for your video?
For the video editing, I use Adobe Premiere because we have a PC system rather than a Mac system. And in regards to that, I'm glad you asked that question. I just did a book called The 25 Key Essential Steps for Editing Video in Premiere CC. And so I use that, and it's with the, if I can plug it, with the book, the step-by-step process of explaining it. I found so many books to be so frustrating because they either assume you knew stuff you didn't, or they so burdened you with things that you didn't need to know in order to make a video. And I just cut to the chase. It's like, okay, these are the 25 steps. There's other things, there might be shortcuts or whatever, but you follow this and you'll be able to make a great video. So I've been doing the Premiere thing, and
we taught our first video editing course last year. Here at our house in Hoot Hollow, we have a teaching facility that we made, and Joe taught the first video editing course, and it went very, very well. And the guys who were here really enjoyed it and made some pretty cool little videos that they actually shot themselves the footage and then put it together with different audio parts to it. So it was fun. And the book, without me having really done much of that, by following his book and then what little he's told me, I can actually do a tiny bit of digital editing or whatever, and I'll know more because I'll do a quick plug. I'm actually involved with a nonprofit organization called Girls Who Click, and it was formed by another woman, female professional photographer, Susie Esterhaus, and our whole concept is to give free one-day workshops to girls 14 to 17. And we're going to expand that age a little bit because we seem to be getting girls 12 to 17 as well. But because we can't do our workshops this summer because of everything with social distancing and not large gatherings, I'm actually going to be doing a video teaching series for that organization for the young women. But I'll also make it that any young person who wants to get into photography will be able to follow my videos with exposure, composition, some natural history. So it'll be a lot of fun. And once I learn it, I'll be editing my own videos because Joe says he doesn't always have the time to help me. So, but it's a great organization, and I hope to expand that more into the photography for other young people.
Well, let me clarify. The reason I don't have time is Mary when she bought Adobe Premiere on her own and said, I'm going to learn it.
And I never did.
So it's like, all right, baby, you bought it. Now it's time that you learn it too. So, but it's been a great thing. It's been a lot of fun. And, going back to about how we fill our time, learning these new things and doing these new things have been really rewarding. And I think if people look at this downturn right now that we have in the fact that people can't go to work or whatever, it gives creative people an opportunity now that we did not have for a long time, because we have the time now and we could make use of it. And we certainly have. And that's why I'm putting these books together right now, because I figure this is a perfect time for people to learn Premiere. You could devote 3 days of your life to reading the book and practicing and whatever. And we just have a cat that might stick its tail in the view.
Yeah, it's dinner time for our cats, and he has just jumped up on my desktop to tell me it's time.
Yeah, cats will do that. Well, let me know about that Chicks That Click. I've got a granddaughter that's about 13, and she has some interest in photography anyway, so something I'd like to pass on to her.
Well, I'll tell you, there are, I think it's 16 or 17 of us women photographers who are involved. So we have, and we will be giving workshops all over the country, depending on where we all live. And I know you're in Nevada. I'm not sure where your granddaughter is, but there's definitely ones in California and Washington State, and I think Colorado. So there may be something nearby once we can get things going again. But I'll be sure to make sure I'll make sure you get the link to the Girls Who Click, website, so that you can share it with your granddaughter, because that's what it's all about, is getting these young women into something that's so much fun and so creative, and something they can do now and throughout their life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we go, tell everybody where to find you guys and your work and everything that you do.
Can see. Sorry.
Well, our website is www.
Sorry, there goes the cat's tail.
Hoot Hollow, HOOTHOLLOW. And we have a YouTube channel now that right now doesn't have like a channel devoted name, but if you would search Wildlife and Nature with Joe and Marianne McDonald, that would bring you to the site on YouTube. And we have from our website, you can get to our various books that are being ebooks on eJunkie. That's the one on Premiere and the one coming up on focus stacking.
And through our website, which is www.hoothollow.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, which we send out right now about every other month. And that highlights some of the trips coming up, or new books or new videos or whatever we're offering as well.
And also friends of ours that are in the field that are writing stuff. Alan Murphy, perfect example. He's a spectacular bird photographer, lives in Texas, and he's made some really great books on ebooks on bird photography and bird videos. And we help promote each other's work there, and I do so very happily, because they are packed with information. So our newsletter profiles things like that too. So it's not just all about us.
Well, it's been great fun. I have enjoyed every minute of this conversation. So thanks for being on the show, and we'll have to have you back again. You already mentioned a couple topics that would be interesting to do together. So we'll get together in the future and see if we can't make some of that happen.
Thank you, Kirby, for inviting us. It's been a lot of fun.
Good. Well, bye for now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. He just said, I'm going to go feed the cat then. So go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So bye for now to our audience, and bye to you guys. And we'll be back on Photographing the West on May 30th. And in the meantime, everybody stay well and stay safe in this crazy environment we're in right now. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.